Who likes examinations? It is important to understand the diversification of opinions as well. Okay, if I'm not writing about state sovereignty and foreign aid and all these issues, who's writing? And interpreting our realities through the eyes of Western academics. So when you look at what has been written about Pakistan in 2006 to 2016, most of the work is extremism, terrorism, fundamentalism, war on terror, all that. Pakistan is much more than that, isn't it? The first thing I believe that we need to do when it comes to these things is decolonize. My first article got rejected at least 6 times. It took me 4 years to publish it.
Oh, wow. That must be also very discouraging, right?
Oh, very discouraging, very frustrating, and a lot of people give up that pursuit.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where we put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Our guest today is a thorough academician, an assistant professor at the National University of Science and Technology, and has authored multiple books on knowledge production, its dissemination, and how it forms the ideas and constructs that we hold dear and near to us. None other than Dr. Ahmed Waqas Waheed. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you so much.
How have you been? How's the day been treating you?
It's been all right. A little hectic because of examinations these days.
And how's that treating you?
Oh, well, examinations. So,
It's a struggle for teachers and students both, I guess.
Oh, I mean, it drives anxiety on different levels in both cadres of, so yeah.
It makes sense. Once they're happening, you don't really want to get into it once it's done right.
Who likes examinations?
Apparently not anyone, it would seem. So tell me, Dr. Saab, this field of knowledge production, it's a very loaded kind of a concept and a loaded term as well. Can you tell me what it means? What is knowledge production?
So basically, everything that we build ourselves on, our thought, our ideas, every practice that we do, is based on a certain kind of knowledge. What I argue is, and what a lot of academics in my field and of this leaning argue, is that knowledge constructs certain truths and realities which are then operationalized in a way to make policy outcomes, you know. So, because we all have distinct knowledges, depending on what we've heard, what we've read, how we've been raised, the environment, the circumstance. It's a collage of all these little knowledges that we possess that come together to manifest themselves in practical applications.
Right.
So, how is this knowledge produced then? Who produces this knowledge? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Who gets to operationalize it? Who gets to theorize about it? Who gets to write about it?
Yeah.
So this whole process is called knowledge production.
Interesting. And you said knowledges.
Knowledges.
Is that a word?
Yeah, that is a word.
What does it mean?
Because, for example, when you read books, so for example, if you're doing your degree and you're doing your degree, let's say in international relations, there's certain knowledge that's coming from there.
Yeah.
But then you come back home, you sit in front of a news channel and you hear certain anchors talking about how the world works, what is happening in the world, international affairs.
Yeah.
And then there's a certain knowledge coming from there. And then you sit with your father or your uncle and they're talking about, what Pakistan is, how the policies are working or not working. So knowledges follow. So these are distinct knowledges, one different than the other.
Right.
And they come together to build a certain discourse in your head about how you view the world. So they all come together. So it's not just one knowledge. It's these different, very small knowledges that come together and build a discourse through which you look at the world.
And would you say that everyone then holds a different set of knowledges?
Yes, I would say that. And that is why we are so different in the way we think and act in this world. And that is why it is important to understand the diversification of opinions as well. Because, because everybody has different sets of knowledges, everybody, so some people might align with you in some ways, but in other ways they might not.
True.
So yes, different people have different knowledges, and those different knowledges shape the way they look at the world and operationalize that knowledge in their own worlds as well.
Right. And what got you interested in getting into this field?
So I have a bachelor's in computer sciences.
That I did not know.
Yeah, I didn't do well. That's why. Then I tried, because in our time you were either an engineer or a doctor, so I tried my foray in telecom engineering.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't go well as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I realized that, I'm not a science guy. So I thought I should try social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
So I enrolled for a master's program in international relations at Sussex.
Right.
So everything was going fine. I mean, I was just reading, learning. When the time came for my thesis was on foreign aid.
Right.
And I started researching on foreign aid, and I realized that Pakistani academics had not researched on foreign aid. So every research on foreign aid that I would find was either by a Western academic, an American or a British, and it got me thinking. I mean, if we're not researching about issues that are so close to us, and at that particular point in time, foreign aid has always been a very important thing in our social lives.
Oh, for sure.
So I was like, why aren't we researching about it?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, at that particular point in time, I didn't know the difference between objective research and subjective research the way I understand it today.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of my thought. Why aren't we producing knowledge? It was when I started researching. When I came back to Pakistan after my PhD, I got a book published. And then I thought, when I got the book published, that book was on Pakistan's state sovereignty.
Yeah.
And I found out that there is nobody who's written about Pakistan's state sovereignty. And state sovereignty is something that you read in the newspaper every
I
other
think
day.
it's every other day we have a statement about...
So what we are actually assimilating is other people's opinions.
True.
So we are a society that takes opinions and gives opinions. And there was no research basis to the idea of state sovereignty.
Right.
And then that again got me thinking that, okay, if I'm not writing about state sovereignty and foreign aid and all these issues, who's writing?
Yeah.
And I found out that Western academics were writing about it. And we were assimilating those writings as if they belonged to us, and interpreting our realities through the eyes of Western academics.
Interesting.
And that holds true because there was a research conducted by Tikna in a book, Scholarship Around the World. She says that 80% of the research in international relations is produced by Western academics.
80%?
80%. And in my research, so I started researching on knowledge.
Yeah.
Who gets to talk about Pakistan? Why? What are they talking about Pakistan? So I took a sample size of around 100 journals, top journals.
Right.
So there's a ranking,
Yeah.
So I took that ranking and I started looking at a period of 10 years from 2006 to 2016. Who writes about Pakistan?
Right.
And you'd find that 51% of what is being written on Pakistan is by Western think tanks.
Oh, wow.
So you're assimilating actually knowledge produced by somebody for their governments, pursuing their national interests, but you taking it for yourself and you're saying, oh no, this applies to me as well. So that, again, the entire knowledge product that, who gets to talk about Pakistan?
Right.
What kind of discourse shapes Pakistan? For instance, there is an undergraduate sitting in an American university.
Right.
Never been to Pakistan. How would that undergraduate know about Pakistan?
Well, clearly from
journal articles, reading lists, books. So, that for that undergraduate, Pakistan is not a reality till the time it manifests in that undergraduate's mind, right? Through these journal articles. So when you look at what has been written about Pakistan in 2006 to 2016, most of the work is extremism, terrorism, fundamentalism, war on terror, all that. So Pakistan is much more than that, isn't it?
For sure.
So let's say if that person's knowledge about Pakistan is reduced to these 6 topics, it builds a certain knowledge about Pakistan.
That makes sense.
And that knowledge then gets operationalized whenever that person is in a position to implement or do something.
That's also a very precarious situation where, I understand someone who does not have access to the context, right? Like, for example, you gave the example of an undergrad in the US, right? And I can understand to some extent that, you know, like they would get this information from these sources of knowledge. But what about the knowledge about Pakistan that we are creating within Pakistan? I mean, like, when you look at research articles in local as well as international journals by Pakistanis, you'll also see a very high rate of citations of Western scholars. How do you think that impacts or like feeds into this whole conversation about identity construction?
Actually, a lot, because I found out that from 2006 to 2016, in the top 100 journals, which have a higher level of circulation, and that's why they're in the top 100.
Right.
How many authors do you think Pakistani-based Pakistanis published in those journals? 9.
9?
9. Not even 10. 9. So and those 9 topics were very different from what was being published by the rest of the academia on Pakistan. Now, there's a thing about, now when your local scholars are not publishing as much good work, I mean, they are publishing in the local industry, you know,
Right.
so you've got these national journals in which they're publishing. But then my question is, how many academics actually give these publications from these journals in your reading list?
Yeah.
Not many. So essentially what you're doing is, following the idea of quality, that the Western academic pursues quality, and that is why that academic needs to be read. You're feeding Eurocentric ideas
Right.
to your own undergraduates and your own students,
True.
who build on that, you know, that episteme, and they move forward with that kind of knowledge. So the first thing I believe that we need to do when it comes to these things is decolonize. I mean, it's a strong word, but that's how it is. I mean, there is again the policy of the Higher Education Commission, for example,
Right.
which tells you how the local knowledge industry works.
Yeah.
You know, so they've incentivized publication for promotion.
Right.
You know, so they've got, for social scientists, it's 10 publications in 6 years.
Yeah.
And for you get promoted from an assistant professor to an associate professor.
Right.
Now, every academic knows that when you send a journal article to an academic journal, foreign journal, a good journal,
Yeah.
it takes 2 to 3 years to get published.
Yeah.
So imagine that you've sent one and then you send a second. You can never make an associate professor in the right time. So what do people do? To make associate professor in 6 years, then they start publishing locally in journals.
Right.
And the problem with that is they have no outreach. So nobody from outside
Yeah.
reads these local journals.
Yeah.
So the knowledge about
Circulation is
Pakistan,
basically
it's
within
just circulating here.
Right.
They're preaching the choir. You know, they're already telling those who know something that they know. They're saying it again and again and again. And the knowledges and the ideas that are supposed to transcend these boundaries, you know, so that the Western academic also understands where the Pakistani academic is coming from, doesn't happen. So there is a huge there's a huge gap between the knowledge production processes in the West and the national production processes, because of which the interpretation of who we are, the way we see ourselves, does not cross boundaries.
Interesting. And so you've put me in a bit of a fix with this right now, but do you think that there is a lapse in quality in local journals and local academic research, which is why they're not being circulated as such in, you know, like in Western circles? Or do you think it's more of a you know, like the voice is not reaching there because the market is already saturated for opinions on Pakistan, let's say?
Okay, there are 2 ways we can, so there are 2 dimensions in which I think this works. Firstly, yes, the quality of our national journals are not up to the standard of what the Western knowledge production community produces.
Right.
And that could be for multivarious reasons. And I believe that one of them is the language barrier itself. No matter how good we would be in English,
Yeah.
We will never be as good as the native speaker. So the way the translation and the processes happen, and the way the grammar happens, and maybe we will never be able to coherently put down an idea the way we would want to project it or promote it.
Right.
So language is a barrier. The second is that the Pakistani academic is content publishing here.
Right.
They're not really invested in promoting their ideas abroad because they understand that, if they start doing that, a lot of things don't hold value for them because they're not incentivized that way.
True.
So, it's all right for them to just publish in a local journal and get away with it and, lead their lives, better lives. But then there's the other side as well. If they want to publish in an international journal, now because we are not as rigorous in methodological trainings and theoretical trainings
Right.
and English as a language, so they suffer multiple setbacks. For example, my first article got rejected at least 6 times. It took me 4 years to publish it.
Oh, wow.
My first article. And so imagine...
That must be also very discouraging, right?
Very discouraging, very frustrating, and a lot of people give up that pursuit. There's a whole trend that I was watching on Twitter the other day, where academics are actually leaving the academia, joining the industry, motivating others because they say this is thankless work. Because it impinges on our well-being at the same time. It's frustrating, it reduces anxiety, all that jazz. But the thing is that, so you try publishing in good journals, but the knowledge production processes do not allow you to, 1, publish as quickly as you want to be published.
Right.
2, social sciences is all political. It's all political.
Yeah.
If anybody tells me that social, we are all right with methodology, I say all right, but it's political. And there will be biases, and there will be subjectivities, and people will... they will argue with you. And sometimes you don't have answers to those arguments. Sometimes you're too strong in those arguments. So there's a host of situations that are happening internationally because of which the national scholar gets a little dejected and a little frustrated and gives up that pursuit.
But you're also doing work on fixing some of these problems, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, the Rhodes Initiative, for one, is something that's looking at improving the quality of social sciences research. Can you tell me a bit about that? Like, what prompted you to start that, and how is it doing? What kind of work is it producing right now?
So you see, I'm a scholar for international relations and political science. And within international relations and political science, especially in Pakistan, there are 2 dominant thoughts. There's realism school, and then there's liberalism or neoliberalism and Marxism. So, these are dominant structural thoughts.
Right.
Now, nobody talks about Marxism because, you don't want to sound like a commie.
Right.
So we stick to state and
avoid the stigma.
Economy. So my idea was, I thought that till the time we get stuck in this loop, because realism is again a concept that comes from the West. Neoliberalism is a concept that comes from the West. And you're trying to implement it on local realities. It might sometimes justify a lot of things, it might not, So I thought that why don't we introduce to the international relations community at large of ideas, they might be Eurocentric,
Right.
but I call them counter-hegemonic because they're trying to unsettle the hegemony of the dominant ideas.
Right.
So Rhodes
And the dominant ideas being?
dominant ideas being realism, Marxism, liberalism. So through Rhodes Initiative, which is an acronym for Research on Advancement and Development of Social Sciences, we're trying to bring alternative ideas to the general public so that we can showcase and demonstrate that there are other ways of thinking and conceptualizing the world as well.
Yeah.
So you don't really have to myopically and very narrowly look at a certain set of principles to understand how the state works or doesn't work.
Right.
There are other ways of doing it as well. And introduce a little critical thinking. So that is number one. The second, as I told you earlier, is the idea to decolonize our minds, to think beyond the structures that we've been provided and we've lived through and we've, made it part of our existence to unsettle those structures, decolonize ourselves, and then think, how does indigenous thinking and indigenous realities transform into indigenous thought, and hence might make the outcome more actionable, more relevant to local realities.
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do.
And that's absolutely brilliant work. I mean, the connection between decolonizing knowledge and, well, to put it simply, our minds, and the information, the positions and perspectives that we hold. Honestly, my first reckoning with this idea was when I haven't finished the book, but I was reading Edward Said's Culture and Imperialism. And in that, he makes this very interesting observation that there is a part of this world that is globally known as the Middle East. But we fail to consider what it is in the middle of on a planet that is, like how do you determine what part is in the middle of a spherical object?
True.
Right? And east of where? It is not east of Pakistan where we're sitting right now. But when I say Middle East, you probably think of the same region, which is West Asia, technically. So, I mean, that also made me think of how much we're influenced by Eurocentric narratives and how much we don't even realize it. And once you see it, you really can't unsee it.
I was talking to my class the other day. I said, whenever we're talking about the ideology of Pakistan, we talk about a two-nation theory, right?
Yeah.
I said, there was a third nation as well. And the third nation was the colonizer.
Yeah.
Why have we never spoken about the third nation? I mean, your entire courses on political science and international relations actually give you no clue of the colonizing processes. You've been told that, this is how 200 years it has happened. This is what the British did. But there has been no research after 1947 on how it has changed the way we look at things.
Right.
So, for instance, other colonized nations came up, for example, Frantz Fanon, an Algerian, came up with the idea, he wrote that book, Black Skin, White Mask, and The Wretched of the Earth.
Yes.
And then you've got other people writing about the influence that colonization had on the people and how it... Well, we've never had that. We've never had the discussion about what it was that we consider colonization and what were its impacts. So now, when people from across the border like Arundhati Roy or Shashi Tharoor write something, we're like, oh, wow. Why? Because people who are in this part of the land consider that something that is far and forgotten. And they've never brought it into the national discourse.
Right.
So the entire idea is to, first let's decolonize our thought and the way we have looked at the social sciences, provide a little context.
Yeah.
I'll give you a small example. In 2005, they introduced this concept of failed state index, and from 2005 till 2011, every year that the failed state index would come, Pakistan would be the top 10. And, so there was this hullabaloo about, oh, we're not a failed state, or, oh, you are a failed state. And I used to think at that time, and then I wrote it in a book as well, that there's a context to that state failure. If it is a state failure, which I don't believe it is, I think it's a made-up category. It's a construct, Western construct. But there's a context to why we are the way we are. And if you trace that context back, you can trace it back to the colonial times. So for instance, when Pakistan was partitioned from India in 1947, there were 17 ordnance factories. 16 went to India. Pakistan had one. There were 1,800 bureaucrats serving in the Indian bureaucracy, the subcontinental bureaucracy. 80 came to Pakistan. The rest stayed there. Wow. And this is something that, Aisha Jalal has mentioned in her book as well, and other people have as well. But it is absent from our national consciousness. How we grew, under what circumstances we grew, what did we do. So there is a certain context. So what happens is the way the international relations and the political science is happening in Pakistan right now, there is a process of decontextualization and dehistoricization.
Right.
So when you're talking about war and terror, you're just focusing on the war and terror. And if you're talking about the war and you're just focusing on the war in Afghanistan. Or if you're talking about failed states, you just focus on history. You don't provide any context in history.
Right.
Without which you can't make sense of it all.
That checks out. That definitely checks out. In the numbers that you just mentioned, like the post-partition division of resources, I would say, human resources, industrial resources. The fact that it's, the disparity is just so great. Puts a lot of things in perspective for me as well, honestly.
I'll ask you, how many undergraduate students in Pakistan doing social sciences degree are actually given courses that are rigorously analyzing Pakistan's history? How many? How many tell you that this was the distribution of the resources? Or how many tell you that this is the problem we faced exactly after 14 August 1947? Not many?
I cannot recall a single course that I would have taken on the subject.
So what do you get to hear? Oh, 1947 partition, 56 Ayub, 58 dictatorial regime, 65 war, 71 war, 77 hanging,
Yeah,
79
that's the
Afghanistan.
standard chronology.
Standard
that
chronology,
Yeah.
but nobody gets to the specificities of what was happening there.
Right.
And it is in those specificities where you find the context and the history, and then Pakistan starts making a little sense to you. And then you start understanding why we are the way we are.
Right. So how do you think, let me just circle it back to where our conversation started from, which was this comparison of knowledge production and comparing how many Pakistani voices exist in the market and in the community, and as opposed to Western voices. How do you think if Pakistani scholars, and I'm not considering the exceptions, of course, but if we are not aware of, or if we are not analyzing our history from this perspective, do you think then that it's justified that our voices are not reaching the West in the kind of way that the Western voices are reaching us, or is there something else at play here?
No, the thing is, I think it's kind of justified. I think there are two sides to the story. There is a Western hegemony of ideas. There is a Western dominance of the production processes of knowledge. So that holds true in itself.
Right.
But then the local knowledge production industry, which includes academics and scholars and these journals and think tanks, they can't be exonerated from their shortcomings as well. So, which one comes first?
Right.
It's a chicken and egg story.
Yeah.
Should they improve first for that to go down, or should, the Western academics allow more space to the Pakistani academic for this to work? So that's anybody's guess. But I think the blame lies squarely across both divides.
Right.
I think, again, the problem is that after 1947, we never really thought how knowledge is going to influence our future. So, for instance, I'm just thinking, imagine a world where everything is written in Urdu, like the Chinese do.
Right.
Imagine where the writings of Fanon or Walls or Kant are accessible in Urdu for anybody who can read Urdu. Do you think that would not change anything?
I think it would change a lot.
It would change a lot. So what does the writing, reading, researching in English do to us as a people? It creates a certain class where a class should not exist. And no matter how good we get in it,
Right.
we can never be as good because, of course, it's something that we've imported. We can't.
Yeah.
So I think the processes which have led us to fail as an industry, knowledge industry, I think, again, they have a context as well. It's not just that the academic is failing just because, the academic can't write in English or read in English or do good research. It's not that. I think there's a history of how year after year, decade after year, the academic value has gone down of research and teaching, and I think the emphasis that we put on language and its dissemination, I think that also contributes very vitally to the whole enterprise of the failure of the Pakistani academic as a disseminator of knowledge.
I think the point that you touched on with the regards to the comparison with the China and how a lot of the knowledge that they produce is in their local languages. Something that we touched upon in when I was doing my master's, and the course was on non-proliferation and just generally how the history of nuclear proliferation has come to be. And China always stood as a very stark, example of an exception, let's say, from the way that the rest of the world, took on to nuclearization and all. And our instructor at the time, Ms. Sadia Taslim, she would always point out to this fact that most of China's discourse is created in their language. It is inherited. It is not imported, right? Which is why their policies on nuclear weapons and all of that stand in such stark contrast to the rest of the nuclear weapons nations of the world. So that was also, these, I'm just pointing out the couple of things that really got me interested in the field of, in the field of knowledge production. And then hearing you for the first time at the Young Researchers Convention, on your talk about the disparity between, Pakistani voices on Pakistan in the knowledge creation and production community, honestly really brought a lot of these thoughts home for me, because it just put it all together in a way where, there's no denying the fact. There's no denying the fact that there is a dearth of Pakistani perspectives, and then there's also a dearth of our inherited history, and looking into that for ourselves, for our own sake. So, I mean, honestly, it's something I feel like we should be having more and more conversations about.
See, the thing is, so you look at all these nations across the world, and you will find that they trace the United States of America, because it's a community of immigrants. So they get to borrow a lot of philosophers from Europe.
Yeah.
And you look at the European countries, and you will find they have philosophers, and they trace their histories through ages, thousands and thousands of years. And then you look at Pakistan. And if I were to ask you that, except for Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, pre-1947, tell me a hero.
Yeah.
Who's a hero of Pakistan before 1947? You don't have a hero.
I'm stumped. Honestly, I'm stumped.
The problem with this country is that it has been caught in a storm in a way that it cannot own its own history. I mean, till the time you glorify Muhammad bin Qasim over Raja Dahir. Raja Dahir was a son of the soil. Hindu nonetheless. But who cares? Son of the soil.
Yeah.
Defending the country or the land against a foreign invader. I mean, that is how most of other nations have viewed their histories.
Right.
So, for instance, when the Ottomans were fighting others, everybody else, Muslim or non-Muslim, was an invader.
Yeah.
When the British were fighting somebody else, everybody else, Muslim or non-Muslim, was an invader.
Yeah.
So when you start reinterpreting a history that has already happened in ways which are not congruent to your thought and idea, you will disenfranchise most of your heroes, most of your philosophers, and most of the land. And that is why I think that most Pakistanis have no ownership of this country, because they have no history of this country. They have no clue.
And how do you think, is there a way to fix this? Because, and again, I'm going to bring it back to knowledge production. It was the first time I heard this term, when you say production, I think of a generic assembly line, like one person is doing one thing and then there's another element putting that, and you put together a product, right? Is there that sort of a process when it comes to knowledge production? And where are some of the areas that we can perhaps intervene in, where we can fix this divorcement from history?
So yes, it is like an assembly line. There's a certain process that is involved. So for instance, first you think, then you write, then you send it to a journal. So knowledge now, for example, if you might be able to publish 100 articles in a newspaper or a magazine. But when I say knowledge, the way I look at knowledge, I'm looking at one facet of it, and that is the academia. You know, because academia is a little prestigious because you give it a little prestige, because you believe that whatever comes from there is going to be researched and objective, and it's going to be solid data and analysis and in-depth. So that's why I look at that knowledge a little more appreciably than other knowledges. So yes, when it comes to that knowledge, yes, there is a process involved when you're publishing. So you're thinking, you're writing, then you're sending it to the editor. The editor looks at what happens, and they send it for peer review. And then the peer reviewers, then they give their feedback, whether it is rejected or accepted, then you send it to another. So yes, there is a process involved there. I think that we need to get out of the knowledge production race.
Entirely.
Why? Because I think that the first thing to do is to start somehow work on translating. And that's what everybody did. So when the Muslims came into power, they translated the Greeks. During Enlightenment, when the Europeans came into power, they translated the Arabs. So what has been happening over centuries is that whoever came into power would translate existing knowledge into their own language and make it accessible to the people. So now I think a similar process needs to be done when it comes to Pakistan, where good work, research work, philosophical work, theoretical work should be published in Urdu and made accessible. So that should be one way of doing it.
Right.
And then, of course, to use proper history and proper context in the way we deliver and disseminate our knowledge to our students and our peers. But when it comes to publishing, that's a different ball game altogether. It's a technical process.
Right.
So for instance, if you want to publish in Pakistan's national journals, saying that, let's glorify Raja Dahir over Muhammad bin Qasim, that might not be possible because it's a political topic, it's a political angle. The editor might not agree with it, the peer reviewers might not agree with it. Similarly, if you want to write something that is more leaning towards Islamist ideas, the Westerners might not, because they have a different way of looking at it. So I think that in itself is a very inhibiting factor. So we've started a project with a very distinguished professor, Indrajit Parmar, at City University, London. So what we're doing is that he's leading a project on a critique of global internationalism.
Right.
And so he's bringing these Southern scholars together and trying to bring knowledges from the South together so that they battle the hegemonic knowledges of the West.
Right.
So maybe that's it's a small step, but in the right direction.
Fascinating, though. Fascinating that this is happening. And how many people do you have in this collective? How many people?
So for the last 2 years, Indrajit Parmar has been hosting seminars and conferences on, how liberal internationalism contributes to global disorder. And he's been having this amazing South scholars from South America and India and Africa, and he brings them together for the seminars. And through those seminars, those voices become a little louder because, of course, there's a participation, there's a dissemination. And that seminar, so it happens every year, and there are more and more scholars. And in that way, knowledges from the South, the way we see how, so for instance, these things that I'm saying to you might not get published the way I would want them to, because I have to follow certain academic writing, a lot of things.
Yeah.
Within which maybe my voice might get lost.
Right.
So in these seminars, these scholars coming from their own national, local epistemes, they come up with knowledge. So that is one way in which, we have started something to combat dominant knowledges and bringing our contexts and our histories and our lived experiences a little, into the battlefield.
Intellectual resistance, basically.
Something like that.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. I'm definitely going to look this up once all of this is over. Yeah, for sure. But we've been on the subject of knowledges for a while now. And I think you've pretty much answered this question, but I want a sort of an integration of something of an Orwellian trope over here. So you're saying basically that all knowledges are not equal. Some are more equal than others. What is making these, like this more equal knowledge sort of stand out?
We don't criticize them. We don't critique them.
Why not?
Because we just don't. Because they're ideas. They're based on ideas.
Right.
There is a certain idea of Western superiority.
That also has a lot to do with the history of colonization as well.
Exactly.
Right?
So, so for instance, when we teach realism and liberalism in our class, we teach them uncritically, without telling our students or our peers, what are the alternatives. So we do tell them about these different theories, but in a manner that is very uncritical. So when these people, these students, these great kids, when they come out into the field, they of course operationalize the knowledge that they already possess. So I think because we've never actually battled colonization in the first place, we've not battled Western hegemony in the first place as a nation, as a community of scholars. We've always been so inward focused, that we've never actually looked at how these dominant ideas, they seep into our collective consciousness and channel the way we think. And I think, so for example, look at, when I say different knowledges, what am I saying? So you've got this one knowledge about the world from your parents, when you're growing up. And then there's another set of knowledge that comes from an Islamic set of rules and principles that you get from the Quran and the Hadith and the Maulvi and the Alim, and
Right.
And then there's another that you get from the academic. And then there's another that you get from the journalist.
Right.
Now you see how many different, and each one is different than the other.
That's true.
The journalist is committed to this day-to-day information. The academic is more theoretical, philosophical in their way of discerning. The Islamist, because we're an Islamic people, the way we get that knowledge contradicts almost every other thing that we do. And then what our parents tell us.
Yeah.
So there's so many different clashes in our mind between different knowledges that the outcome of that clash determines what you will operationalize at a certain point in time.
And how is knowledge operationalized? Can you give me like a real world example?
Okay. A real world example. So for instance, when we talk about international relations, when I was doing my PhD thesis was on state sovereignty, and I was interviewing elites, foreign secretaries and foreign ministers, and every time I would ask them about state sovereignty and Pakistan-US relations, and every one of them said that there is no morality in the international world. It's a grab for power.
Right.
Every country pursues its own national interest. And I always ask them, but what about, those countries that sometimes they're benevolent, that they give because, so, I mean, it cannot always be about national. Is it always? And there would be there's no morality. Later, the scholars who've come later, after the 1990s,
Right.
for example, starting from Alexander Wendt, that anarchy is what you make of it.
Right.
So you construct a certain idea of the world, and then you operationalize that idea of the world. So if you believe that there is no anarchy, there is no morality in the international world,
Right.
and every state is going to pursue its own national interest on a zero-sum game,
Yeah.
you will follow that line. So
And
you will not
if
show
enough
any
people
morality
are-
because you have been channeled to think that there is no morality.
Yeah.
So if I show morality, that would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because then you're setting yourself up for failure if you
Exactly.
believe that everything is amoral.
Well, this is easy.
Interesting.
So you've got different ideas about morality on international stage, different ideas about power, different ideas about sovereignty. But what happens is that because we've been taught about them in a certain way, when we go out into the real world, we operationalize those ways. So first we need to rethink
Right.
what it means. So for instance, the way we exercise state sovereignty with the United States is different from the way we exercise it with India, which is different from the way we exercise it with China,
True.
right? So that means that there's no monolithic idea of the state sovereignty. It's
True.
variable,
Yeah.
right? So sovereignty then is different concepts. It's layered, it's variable,
Right.
it's changeable, but it is presented to us through the idea of realism as this monolithic, unchangeable concept
Right.
on which the entire idea of state stands. So if sovereignty falls, then the state will fall.
Right.
But sovereignty falls. It falls, it is pooled, it is shared. So there are many different ways in which, for example, look at the European Union.
Yeah. True.
They've pooled their sovereignty together.
Yeah.
And they've empowered these states have empowered the European Union to make certain decisions for themselves. So there's an idea of shared sovereignty
True.
and pooled sovereignty.
True.
So they came out of this idea of a monolithic, very strong state sovereignty.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to think about something like that as well. Right?
Yeah, man. And I am in agreement. I don't know if the leaders of the world are too or not.
But as scholars, you're not supposed you're not supposed to be relevant.
Yeah.
So you see, the thing is, for instance, we've got this SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation.
Yeah.
Hasn't been able to do anything.
Yeah.
Have you never wondered why? Because the paranoia on both sides of the divide is not only so deeply embedded in our national consciousness, it is also because we have never actually thought that, we should come out of it and look at it from an alternative perspective. Maybe an alternative idea would bring more harmony, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess because we still remain within the confines of dominant ideas, I think that is why I think we need to first unravel those dominant ideas before we actually start talking about our own ideas.
Yeah.
And that cannot happen again and again till the time we do not start a process of historicization and contextualization,
Right.
which is important so that everybody knows what we've gone through, how we've gone through it,
Yeah.
what have been the social and the political and the national effects of our history on us. And then you move forward. Okay, all right, this has happened. Now what do we do? And then you start thinking anew. So the idea of it all is that we need to bring our history and our context, as I said,
Yeah.
back into the discussions about the country. We need to communicate with other certain scholars and scholars positioned in the West
Right.
who believe that the dominance of Western ideas have been detrimental to the growth in the third world. And I think it's a small step forward, but it is a right step forward. And
Right.
maybe one step at a time, when we start educating the there's people through our students and our conferences, and through our peers, that maybe it is time to think of how to change the local knowledge production industry in a way that it not only allows indigenous scholarship and indigenous thought to grow, but also allows scholars to communicate across the borders with their Western colleagues and convey to them and communicate to them their own local realities, so that they are in a better understanding as well of how to look at Pakistan when they talk about Pakistan.
Right. Interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab, for sharing your thoughts with us, for your experiences, and for sharing with us how you came about working on this field, which I find endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with us today.
The pleasure was all
And I wish you all the very best in your endeavors with the Roads Initiative and with everything else that you're doing. And I wish your students well with their exams. And you as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this conversation. It takes a lot of hard work from our team to bring these conversations to you, and we'd really appreciate your support. If you could please like this video and share it if you found it interesting. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming products, please press the bell icon. Thank you so much for staying with us.